the rest of today, we thought we would talk a bit about something maybe a little more positive that's happened recently. I don't know if you guys have uh, heard about the recent endeavor by NASA and SpaceX that happened over this weekend. So that was really exciting. Like, I'm kind of a giant nerd, so I watched the whole thing, both the launch and the docking. So I thought we could take some time to just like think about physiology in space and all that cool stuff. And so that would be kind of like a short intro, and I'm sure Mike will chime in to that as well, since he's like our resident NASA enthusiast. And after that, we have a presentation on college applications, med school applications, and general recommendations regarding that. So let me figure out how to share my screen. Just realized I'm not good at this with Google Slides, but even someone as old as me can probably figure this out. Okay. And as usual, if you have any questions or comments, like, feel free to put them in the chat. So, physiology in space. This was inspired by a launch on Saturday. So first, we can start with, oh, here we go, a bit of history. So this was a really exciting event, not only because it was like the first commercial launch of humans into space, but also this was the last manned space launch in the US since 9 years ago. The last mission was like the last one of the American Space Shuttle program back in 2011. That was the STS-135. And the development of this project actually started all the way back in 2004. So these things definitely take time. And just a couple of pictures. So on the left is a picture of the actual rocket, the Falcon, which also successfully re-landed. That's the correct term for it. It came back safely after launching. And on the right is a picture of the Dragon, which is actually carrying the crew members docking at the International Space Station. Oh, you can't see the screen? Oh, yeah. Oh. No.
How old are you?
Oh, I didn't press share. Wow, that's really bad.
There we go.
Okay.
Okay.
Now you get to start over.
Oh my goodness. Okay, that's embarrassing. Everyone, I'm sorry. Where is the chat? Okay. Thank you for the note. So these are just the pictures, and I mentioned like the history, the title slide. And yeah, so on the left is the rocket, and then on the right is the actual sorry guys, that was my bad. Okay, so moving on a bit to the physiology in space. So a lot of this has to do with like the biggest difference in, I guess, environmental conditions in space versus on Earth. Obviously, there's no air and there's no gravity. And when we think about like these changes in physiology that happen as humans switch environments so drastically, it's really astonishing like how the human body has adapted and evolved over time to be like exquisitely regulated by the environment of the Earth as opposed to something else. So ways in this that this can manifest, basically any body system that takes gravity as an input is definitely influenced when that changes from Earth's gravity to zero gravity. So one of the things that can happen to a lot of astronauts is really bad motion sickness. And I'm actually one of the lucky ones who gets this on Earth frequently. So, you know, I probably should never go to space. But so the thought of like the mechanism behind motion sickness is this kind of conflict in sensory perception. So your visual inputs are giving you some sort of signal, and then your balance and gravitational inputs are giving you another signal. And if these are not aligned, your brain kind of thinks like, what's going on, and it's very confused. And there's some thoughts, like, you guys should correct me if I'm wrong. I think this is kind of an old theory, but like the reason why you start feeling nauseous and like want to throw up is because like something that can give you this imbalance in sensory inputs can be like toxins or poisons. So your body is trying to like get those out in any way it can and just like vomit everything. So that's kind of the theory behind why motion sickness happens. So I had two questions for you guys. One is fairly obvious. So what's the sensory organ that provides visual inputs? Before I get into the next one. So obviously our eyes, but what about the sensory organs that provide like balance and gravitational inputs? Do you guys know how the human body actually senses that? The answer is in the second point. Okay, so there's a part of the inner ear that, and I can move on to the next picture actually, that senses changes in the direction of gravitational force. So there's a picture of like the coordination of all these inputs here. And so basically your eye sends signals to the brain on like what is changing visually. And there's the vestibule of the inner ear that also sends signals to the brain. And then the brain coordinates these sensory inputs into a perception of where you are in space. And it's actually kind of interesting in that this feedback also changes like the way your eyeballs move in terms of like their reaction. And that actually takes gravity, the force of gravity, as an input. So what can happen to astronauts early in flight is when they move into 0G, they kind of lose that input in their coordination as well. So like on top of being at further risk for like motion sickness, they also lose a bit of hand-eye coordination. So I thought that was kind of interesting that your sensory inputs are so finely tuned to gravity. And so another thing that can happen in space is muscle atrophy. So this is basically loss of muscle or deconditioning. And previous studies of like previous space missions have shown that after 2 weeks in space, the rate of atrophy can occur at a rate of 5 to 16%. And normally, like if you exercise regularly and then just like sit on a couch forever, that can take like 7 weeks. So the rate of deconditioning is pretty intense in space, especially. So I was wondering if you guys can think of why it might be so different. Any ideas? So it stems back to the same theme of loss of gravitational force, right? So like your muscles are, yeah, exactly. Thank you. Without gravity, your muscles aren't being stimulated as often. That's exactly it. Great. So it's kind of like extreme deconditioning where they just kind of do nothing and float. So all your hard exercise work just kind of dies. But you can get it back. And okay, so another thing that can happen is basically your heart and your blood vessels are innervated with nervous and muscle tissue that also like counter gravitational forces, because like when you're standing, gravity is kind of pulling blood towards your lower extremities. And obviously if there's no gravity, this kind of stops happening in space. So you kind of lose this thing called orthostatic tolerance, which is kind of the term for regulating the distribution of blood volume across the body, which then translates into blood pressure. Can be measured by blood pressure in some way. So basically these astronauts go into space, they kind of lose this ability to, not lose, but kind of habituate to 0G on their blood vessels. But then while they're landing, the gravitational forces are huge, up to 1.6G. And this presents a huge problem because like if your body isn't is no longer kind of conditioned to bring blood flow to your head, and then you encounter this huge gravitational force pulling everything to your legs, it can really increases the chances of just like passing out because you don't have enough blood flow to your head. So this can be very dangerous, and it's countered with things known as anti-G suits. So first, here's like a illustration of what kind of happens on a very high level. So basically, on launch day, this is kind of the distribution of blood volume in your body, and then immediately after, you enter like this zero G environment, like there's kind of too much force, upward force relative to the environment. So that's why you see this kind of pooling to the head. And actually, there's been studies showing that like astronauts early in their mission have like a puffy head as well, because that's like how much volume has kind of accumulated in their head. So it's really interesting. Over time, your body learns to adapt to this. And then on landing day, it's just like extreme forces pulling everything to your legs and your feet. So the way they counter this is by like these things known as anti-G suits, and they work on a pretty simple mechanical principle in that there's a lot of force pushing all this blood down. So they have these like air bubbles, I guess, in these suits that kind of provide an upward force up. So you're kind of squishing, it's providing this counter force to the G forces when you're accelerating downwards. And on the left is a suit that's actually used in for like fighter pilots, I believe. And then on the right is like a similar version of the anti-G suit used by astronauts. Any questions or comments? No. Okay, so I'd just like to mention, oh, there's a couple more things. Sorry, I forgot. So if you're interested in space or space medicine, there's actually career paths for this niche field, niche but very cool field. First, there's like military residence programs in aerospace medicine. There's opportunities to do a clerkship at NASA for fourth-year medical students, which I didn't know about. And it's not just like through medicine that you can kind of get into this type of field. Like there are so many aspects of engineering that's required for like life support systems, exercise equipment to support astronauts. They don't decondition so crazily, and all sorts of things. So there's many opportunities in this kind of field too that are reasonably diverse, I guess. And finally, looking forward, so one of NASA's major objectives is to get people on Mars and have prolonged time periods in space. But before they do that, there needs to be some research on like the effects of spending longer periods of time in space on overall health. So one of these programs is known as the Biosentinel program. And one of the biggest concerns is that we don't know what the impact of radiation in deep space is on humans, because like normally we're kind of protected by the Earth's atmosphere. But out in space, there's no atmosphere, so you're kind of just out there with all this radiation. And so the way they try to measure this is by sending these like microfluidic cells filled with yeast that are labeled with markers to recognize damage induced by radiation. So I thought this was like a pretty clever program. And I kind of asked this question of why use yeast, because it's an interesting model organism to use in these kind of studies, because basically yeast can kind of hibernate in this dry form for a very long time. So the advantage of that is you can put the dried form of yeast into a spaceship, shoot it off into space, and then rehydrate them so that to kind of revive them into their normal life cycle. And that way you can remove the confounding effects of the actual rocket launch on the outcomes that you're trying to measure, which is markers of radiation damage. And the way they measure radiation damage is through literal breaks in your DNA, because that's what radiation does. So this is one of the future research projects that's hoping to launch in 2020. I don't know if that's actually going to happen, but we will see. Yeah, that's kind of all I had for you guys today in this short random interlude. And if no one has any questions, we can move on to the second portion. All right, so I can stop the screen share.
Thanks, Celeste. I would say, having looked at careers as an astronaut, though very briefly, and I've been forbidden from pursuing them, there are two main ways in the United States to become an astronaut if you actually want to go into space. Well, actually, there's three now. The first one is to be a pilot in one of the armed forces, and they're often chosen to be the pilots for these missions, especially if they have extra combat experience. So something like training or with test pilots, essentially. The second is to become a mission specialist. And so these are the International Space Station is the only place we're flying humans right now. And all human missions are going to the International Space Station. And so there's a lot of experimentation that goes on there. The astronauts are busy pretty much more than a normal working day every day, and they do a lot of experiments up there. And so they have, in addition to people who are expert pilots, they have expert scientists who go up and help to run these experiments. And then the last way, which is currently being developed, is to be very rich and be able to just pay for a seat on one of these shuttles. But that one requires a different set of different skill set than others. So yeah, there's a lot of exciting experiments being going on in space, and it's an extremely competitive process to become a NASA astronaut. You used to have to learn Russian, but it looks like that requirement is going away now that we can launch our own astronauts again. But again, you'll probably be working with Russians if you were on the International Space Station. No additional questions about space, huh? Okay. And we can talk about something which I hope will generate some questions. We've been talking briefly on a couple of our other discussions and broaching the topic of college. This presentation is less about college, but it can be related, and we can certainly talk about that or have a separate presentation about that. And then also medical school. So a lot of people have had questions about what is required for medical school and what they should do as an undergraduate or even in high school. I'll start with a short answer, which is if you're in high school, don't worry too much. Get to college first and then start worrying. But yeah, I made a short presentation. Let's see. Hopefully I'm better at sharing my screen than Celeste is. Let's see. Okay. Okie dokes. We'll present. Let's see if I can find my chat. I can't. So if they have a question, please stop me. So this is just going to be a brief talk, and the other mentors may stop me and tell me I'm wrong, or add their own perspective. But it's supposed to be a pretty general overview. And again, all of you guys are very different people, and we know that all of you guys have very different backgrounds and very different things that you're going to contribute to both college and medical school campuses. So take all of this with a grain of salt. Some things are extremely explicitly required and many things are not. So this is just some advice that I had, having looked at a lot of medical school applications and just about which applications are the strongest. So this presentation is structured so that the beginning is strict requirements. So these are absolutely required for medical school. If you don't have them, your application will not be considered. And then the rest of the presentation is some things that we'd recommend and things that you can probably get started on more easily than some of the actual requirements. So as a quick note, just in order to make it a little bit more concrete in a couple sections, we're looking explicitly at Northwestern requirements for the MD degree. So this is not for the MD PhD degree, though maybe we'll mention a couple times what's a little bit different about applying to an MD PhD. But this is if you're applying to normal medical school to get your MD at Northwestern. And the reason we did this is that most medical schools have a very, very similar structure and very, very similar requirements. But if you have your heart set on a particular medical school, so if you need to be at UNC, then look at the requirements and make sure that you're meeting those. But in general, if you filled the requirements in this presentation, you'd be fine to apply this year. And so again, requirements do change over time, and they tend to probably balloon over time rather than pare themselves back. So we'll try to mention when different schools might have different requirements than are mentioned in this presentation. So the first and the most boring of all the requirements is course requirements. And so there's some courses which are required. You can read them off: biology, physics, inorganic chemistry, and organic chemistry. All of these are 1 year of lecture plus lab at Northwestern. And so that's either 2 semesters or 3 quarters, depending on how your college system breaks it down. An important note here, Northwestern does not require biochemistry. Almost every other medical school does that I know of. So if you are planning to apply to medical school, take biochemistry, because otherwise you'll limit which universities that you can apply to. You probably don't need to take very much, but it will also you will also have a much easier transition into medical school, because most medical schools start with the biochemistry portion of medical school, and it's pretty vital to understanding some of the basic introductory stuff. I say this as someone with a pretty weak biochemistry background.
I think also, yeah, I think if you, depending on the university that you go to, if you are in a pre-med program, you will have pre-med requirements that basically guarantee that you will meet all of this.
Yeah, so. I have that on a later slide. You're getting ahead of me. Thanks, Sage. But that's true. So yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit more. We had a couple questions last time about college major and changing majors and what majors are best or whatever. So maybe we can talk a little bit more about that in the future. But yes, there are a lot of colleges, especially the larger ones, will have a pre-med major or a couple majors, which everybody knows are pre-med majors. And they will be very closely tailored to meet these requirements. If you're doing something else, so if you want to be an English major or a sociology major or an engineering major, you'll have to keep track of these yourself. It's not that hard. There are some other recommended courses, and I can't think of any colleges, unless you're an engineering major, which I was, but most colleges will require some type of English composition class anyway. Certainly most med schools do. Northwestern recommends a course in statistics or biostatistics. Again, if you're taking a pre-med major, it's probably going to be included. If you're not, if you're doing a science-based major, you'll most likely have some statistics-based course. If not, you may want to add one. And then again, biochemistry, as mentioned earlier. And some schools have broader recommendations or requirements, so more math. And more recently, schools have been adding psychology, sociology, and others. So if you have a specific program you're interested in, just make sure that you check their website before your senior year, so you can actually adjust this. I know I had some problems where I was already graduated and unable to take any courses that would have helped me to fulfill additional requirements. So I was certainly locked out of a couple of schools because I had not taken sociology or psychology. College majors, here we go. So if you're certain that you're going to be going to medical school, and there certainly are people like this, maybe some of you guys, it can definitely streamline things, as Sage mentioned, to choose a major that closely aligns the requirements with the major and medical school requirements. And these are mostly known as pre-med majors. They tend to be very competitive because a lot of people are trying to go to medical school and want to meet all the requirements. But certainly if you enjoy that major, do it. Absolutely, it can make your make the extra coursework a little bit less. So any major can work. I don't know everyone's major of all the mentors here. I was a mechanical engineer, so I essentially overlapped with none of the requirements. It's not the best route to go, but I certainly liked mechanical engineering, and it can be done. I don't know if any of you guys have a different perspective.
Well, so my university had pre-med tracking, so you can't major. So like I was pre-med tracked, and then I had a neuroscience major
Okay.
and a minor.
Yeah, certainly. There are some universities that do it that way. I know, and I was at UCLA. UCLA does not have a pre-med major either, but there are several majors which are known to be pre-med majors. So like it was integrative biology or something like that. I can't remember what it was called. But there are
We had one
certainly
called human
some.
ecology.
Huh?
We had one called human ecology. That was a pre-med track, but we also didn't have a pre-med major. But we did have like a health careers advising office, so that's definitely something to look out for in college, because frequently like they will have presentations for you during orientation week to help you like choose courses if you're interested in doing the pre-med track. But yeah, one of my majors was economics, and that didn't align at all, but it was like kind of fine because that major didn't have too many requirements, so that's another route you can go.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
I'd
think
say for majors, kind of what I've heard is try and do something that you really will enjoy and want to study, and then also do, if that aligns with medicine or like pre-med track, then great, and if not, you can definitely figure out a way to do it. So I think it's like there's like biology or like some of the more science heavy majors will align better with pre-med courses, and you'll have a little bit of an easier time once you get into medical school adjusting to at least some of the subjects they have to take. But if you're really interested in something, definitely go ahead and go shoot for it, and you can add the pre-med requirements on the side.
Yeah, I agree. So I think that's good advice. Do something you like. That's a generally good advice, and I think I give it later in this presentation too. So it's college is the same length as medical school, unless you're doing 2 degrees like an idiot. Generally college is going to take around 4 years, and that's a long time to study something you don't like. And it's much more rewarding to study something you do like. So you have the freedom to choose this in most places. So choose something you like, and it can be done. I will say that engineering majors tend to have more course requirements that are absolutely required. So it's a little bit more work to try to add all the pre-med onto that because you already have a heavy course load, but it certainly can be done. And some of the engineerings align better than others. So bioengineering might align better than others. And then we had a question about changing your major. My philosophy here is changing your major is extremely easy at most places that I know of. Especially early on, you basically just have to file a piece of paper and then you're a different major. So don't be afraid to explore, especially in your first quarter or two or semester or two. Like you'll be able to recover even if you take some courses. You'll have plenty of time to like take all the required courses, even if you take a course that's not in your major, not in your final major. And again, it can be 1 or 2 courses, or it can be 5, and you'll be fine. The one exception here is that if you are in a sub school, so some places it's the engineering school is separate, or the architecture school is separate, or an economics school is separate, or something. It can be harder to transfer it into those. So if you're already in that major, don't transfer out of it until you're sure that you want to, because then you have to transfer back in and you may have to reapply. Okay, major. Some other questions that people might ask. So do AP classes count? I didn't look at that many schools, but at Northwestern and a couple others, they do count. So if you had AP biology, that could count as probably 1 semester of biology for med school requirements, but generally not for the whole year. And many schools, Northwestern included, would like to see you replace that skipped semester of biology with a more advanced biology. So instead of taking intro biology, take a more advanced course with a laboratory and show that you've really mastered that subject and are really interested in the material that you're going to be learning in medical school. So another question, can I take these courses pass, no pass? Most schools require you to take them for letter grades. Even if you can, it's probably not the best idea unless you have an extenuating circumstance, which you'd have to explain anyway. So if you're taking courses with a pass, no pass, or you do really poorly in a course or a whole quarter, if you can explain it, that may not be the end of the world, but otherwise it can be a little bit troubling, and you're definitely going to be asked about it if you have coursework that was weak for a quarter or semester, or in a course that's viewed as vitally important for medical school. So that's one of these required courses. So yeah, my advice would be to not take pre-med courses, so the medical school requirements, as pass, no pass. GPA, another fun one. So many schools, Northwestern included, do not have an explicit minimum GPA. That doesn't mean it's not important, and doesn't mean they don't take it into consideration. It is very important, and it is heavily weighted. And so example, Northwestern's median GPA is 3.91, which is very high. And that can be a little bit challenging. And so I think this is another place where I would advise, especially if you're starting college and it's your first quarter, don't overload yourself, because if you have a really bad first quarter, that can harm your GPA. So take your time, get settled in, learn how, especially right now, college is very different than what it usually is. And so I think depending on how things settle down, hopefully they do, and you guys are able to go to college normally if you're going. I think the first quarter can be a really good time to explore and get used to college. And then if you want to ramp up your course load, do it after the first quarter or semester. The MCAT is another thing that a lot of people worry about. Though you guys should probably be more worried about the SAT or not right now. But it's unfortunately required. So this is a test that you guys are probably all familiar with, but it's definitely a test that you can study for and master the material for. So what is on the MCAT is well known. How the MCAT is structured, how the questions are written is all well known. And there certainly are courses or other materials that you can use to prepare for the MCAT. Definitely don't need to take an entire course to prepare for the MCAT. That said, it can be really helpful. And so the question is often like, what do you need to score on the MCAT? And so look at what the average score is of schools that you're applying to, that you're thinking about applying to. And so this is going to take into account like how strong academically and how strong of a competitive applicant you think you are. At Northwestern, for example, the median score is 520. These numbers don't mean a lot to me because the scoring has changed since I took the MCAT, but this is the 98th percentile. So that's really high. And so if you want to come to Northwestern, you can see that the MCAT I'm doing well on it is extremely important. So it's something that you should definitely take your time and do it correctly. The average score for people who go to medical school is 510, which is the 80th percentile. And so you can imagine that a lot of the people who probably scored below the 70th percentile have said it's probably not going to happen, or I'm not going to get into the school that I want, so I'll retake the MCAT. So both things happen. People give up, and people also retake it and hopefully do better the second or third time. And the reason why the MCAT is viewed as so important, one, some people think that I have not reviewed the evidence myself on this, but many people think that it can predict success in medical school, and also that it's one of the only metrics that's comparable across different schools. So the GPA is not quite the same at every school, and some schools are easier than others or may have more grade inflation than others. So the MCAT is really viewed as one of the only metrics that's comparable across all schools in the United States. And actually worldwide, people outside the United States take the MCAT as well. So don't worry about the MCAT, but I'm still going to give a couple of tips, which I've already kind of said. One is prepare for it and to put the time in. You need to learn both the content, which is really important, and also strategies for taking the MCAT. It's definitely a test that you can strategize for and take in a good way. So there are certainly test-taking strategies, and those are valuable on any future tests. And if you join medical school, you'll be taking tests for another couple of years. probably the rest of your life. If you do poorly, consider taking it again, but make sure that you're actually using your first attempt as a way to learn where your weaknesses were and focus on improving them. And then something that I do see in a lot of applications, which doesn't necessarily harm people, but it's probably a waste of their time, is that people try to take the MCAT during their freshman and sophomore years. And I think that is allowing them to maybe take it again if they don't do well. And I don't think I see very many people who do well during the first or second years, but certainly a good number of people do take it quite early. I would advise you not to do that. Wait till you've learned some of the material in your courses. A lot of this material is very practical material that you will learn. And then make sure you have it like enough of a balance down with your college and college life to actually study for the MCAT and do a good job on it. Taking it early and having to take it again is just a waste of your time to study twice. So that's my advice.
I
And
took
it's
it
a very
early.
expensive exam.
Yeah.
True.
I took it early because they were switching the test the year after. But I would advise, as Mike said, not to take it early.
Am I the only one who took the new test?
I took the one with writing, so like 3 or 4 versions ago.
Same. I also wrote an essay and got a letter on it.
Yeah, and it was like a
Like
letter like
yours.
M through P or something like that. I don't remember what the letter meant, but
Okay, well, I took the new one. So I think, so when you were talking about new additions to the pre-med course requirements, a lot of that is schools targeting towards this test, because there is now a critical thinking section and a
isn't there biochem or
Psych.
physiology or something?
Is biochem.
Yeah, so
Like
there's one that's like physics and chemistry, and then there's one that's biochem, and then there's a critical thinking, and then there's a psych, sociology, neuro one.
Cool.
So that's part of the shift in the course requirement, but it's also, it means that it tests a broader range of abilities, which I think is good. Like I leaned very heavily on my critical thinking and neuro sections, because I'm really, really bad at physics. Yeah, but so it's a little bit evened out, but I do think I will say, like, it is a test that you can study for and then do well on because you studied. A lot of it is pattern recognition in the question style, just like the SAT.
Yeah, the section I'm always most surprised to see people do poorly on is especially once you've read their writing, which has obviously been edited for the essay, but the reading comprehension and like critical thinking one, that section should be doable by everyone as long as you learn how to study for it. It can certainly be a challenging section, but there's no external knowledge which is necessary to do well on that section.
If you ask me, that section is about empathy. It's a lot of like yeah, because it's like you read a piece of writing and then the question is, the writer of that article would feel what way about this next statement.
I think we've seen from current events that there's a bit of lack of empathy in this world, so maybe that's why.
So I mean, I think that they're trying to sort of pre-screen people a little bit to med school, that you can think about what it's like to be someone else. So
Sure.
That's why that section is challenging for people.
All right, well, the point is, don't worry about the MCAT yet. You're way too early to be worrying about this kind of thing, but I thought I'd mention it. One of the sections I think is important both for college applications and the MCAT, which I think is under thought about, is letters of recommendation. I certainly underthink about it almost every time I need to get letters of recommendation, which unfortunately is more often than you would think as you continue going through higher education. So Northwestern requires either a committee letter or 3 individual letters. I don't know, my high school, I had to get individual letters. I don't know if any high schools are doing committee letters or not. I have no idea. But a lot of colleges require letters of recommendation as well. And I think some of you guys are seniors coming up. I can't see the list of who's here. But even if you're not a senior, if you're a junior or senior, it can be a really good idea to kind of groom one or two of your professors, or as many as you need, to become a good letter writer for you. So obviously you're in high school, your professors or your teachers know who you are because you're in their class every single day. And the classes are hopefully not as big as some of the college classes. So hopefully you have a little bit of a leg up there. But if you have a teacher that you really like, or a teacher that you think would be a good letter writer, or you've done really well in their class or something like that, it can be really helpful to try to make sure that they know who you are and that you're applying for college, and that they can really help you by writing a letter of recommendation. Most teachers know that it's part of their job to write these letters, but certainly if you can help them with it, you can get a better letter. So just to cover Northwestern's requirements for medical school, you probably need around 3 letters unless your college does a committee letter. And so some colleges do that for a committee. I don't know how that works.
Yeah, so I went to a committee school. You have to have the recommendation letters in order for them to write the committee letter, because they like take all 3 recommendations and put it into one, and then they interview you and do like a neutral reporting on you. It is not neutral, but that's for another time. But yeah, so the committee letter requires the committee letter requires the letters of recommendation in order to.
So you still have to ask for these letters, and no, they're definitely not neutral, and they certainly take a position on, especially in the committee letters, they certainly have a position where many of them will say, we rate them, if we say with highest recommendation, that means they're in the top 5% of our class. If highly recommend is the top 20%, whatever, recommend is top 50, and if we say do not recommend, then we don't recommend them. So yeah, I think for high school, certainly think about who you'd like to write your letters. This actually caused me a lot of problems in high school because mine were never sent. So make sure that there's someone that you trust, give them enough time. We'll talk more about letters later. But who should write them for med school? It has to be science professors. Unfortunately, engineering professors often do not count as science professors, which is really annoying. If you have a research advisor and you're doing research, certainly you should have your research advisor write a letter. And then long-term employers or volunteer program leaders. Certain schools require different things. So some schools require non-science letters in addition to science letters. Almost everyone requires science letters at these points. So you may need to have more than 3 letters, even if every school only requires 3, just to satisfy the right mix of letters. But again, I would worry more about your college letters than med school letters are now. But certainly in college, once you get there, if you have a really long-term relationship with any professors, that can be a really good person to write your letter for. And then lastly, as a note, some programs and schools require different amounts of letters. Pretty sure the MSTP requires something like 5 or 7 letters. So it gets to be a lot. So things to think about on letters recommendation, and this can apply certainly to either high school or med school, either college or medical school applications. So during junior year or early senior year, before you have to apply, like make sure the person knows who you are before you ask them for a letter. Certainly a lot of professors will agree to write you a letter, even if they don't really remember who you are because they view it as part of their job. But it's really helpful, and when we read the letters on the admissions committees, we can certainly tell which professors actually knew the students and which professors are writing it not knowing them so well. Second thing that's really important is to ask early, and that doesn't mean like a week early, that means like 2-3 months early. A lot of these professors are extremely busy, and the earlier you ask, the better. Again, I had trouble where someone didn't send my letter, so that's a huge problem and something that you can't really force them to do. So if you give yourself a little bit extra time, give them a deadline and say, like they need to be done by the end of, I need my letter submitted by the end of November, even if it's not due till the 2nd week of December. They probably know that, but if you give them enough time, then they'll try to meet your deadline as well. They may not, but if you set an artificially early deadline, and they miss it, it's not as bad as missing the real deadline. And I would advise asking in person if you can. I know right now that's challenging, but I would always follow this up with an email. And I would include my transcript or CV or both. I would give a short summary of what I'm applying for. So you might need a letter for a scholarship, you might need a letter for a college, you might need a letter for a job or something else. Tell them why you need a letter. And then think about summarizing the goal of the letter for them so that they don't have to think about it. So anything you can do to reduce their thinking and align the letter with what you want can help. So it would be great if you could mention this, remind them of how well you did in their class, how like anything that you did, if you did anything special, and I know this is really uncomfortable to do, to remind people how awesome you are. I know it's really hard for a lot of people to talk up themselves. Certainly, this is a time to practice doing that and telling them about how great you were in their class or their whatever they're writing a letter for. And this goes along with more specific letters are better. So if they have a particular story about you, maybe you can remind them of that and they can share that story. If they remember, that's great. Maybe they know you well enough that they don't need you to suggest anything. But it can also be helpful if you have 3 letters or 4 letters to say, like, I want this letter to focus on how good of a team player I am. I want this one to focus on something else, some other aspect of my personality that would otherwise not be conveyed in my application and is really important to showing who I am as a person. Any other letters tips? Letters always are really annoying because you have to ask someone for them and it's kind of a pain.
I think it just like it gets easier over time. And I think the other thing is, so I went to a really big university. Most of my classes, for example, my first year had 500 people in them. The professors did not know me. And I still needed, I needed letters of recommendation that year to get into an honors program. And I had to have them from professors. And so I find it helpful in general, like Mike was saying, like email them, if you met them ever face to face, remind them that that happened, tell them what you like about their class, tell them why you want to do what you want to do, and that will get into their letter because they, especially if they don't know you, they're going to go based on what you tell them. And then if they do know you, whatever you tell them will be enhanced because they probably like you, and people will write ridiculously glowing things about you. And that's great.
Yeah, you guys don't get to see these very often. I'm hoping that my letters were as good as a lot of the letters that we get in other applications. I don't know if they were, because you don't usually get to see letters of recommendation. But certainly there's people do write really good letters of recommendation. People take it seriously. But yeah, make it easy on the person writing your letter. That's how you get a good letter. There's other requirements for medical school. We don't need to talk about them. Basically, background check, drug screen, immunizations. Don't worry about those right now. It's way too far away. The last requirement is to actually apply. I wasn't going to mention this, but we had questions about AMCAS. So I'm going to talk about it very briefly. And I think knowing the structure of the application is a good thing. So the application system is called AMCAS. I don't know what it stands for. But essentially right now, the system is that you fill out a primary what's called a primary application. And that's sort of like the overarching application. And that's sent to every medical school that you're interested in. So you fill it out one time, and then you highlight in a box every school that you want it to be sent to. And that allows you to choose which letters of recommendation are sent to which school. It also allows you to choose if you're applying to MD or MD PhD or other programs at every school. So you can choose a different thing for every school if you want to. This includes all your demographic information, so who you are, and way more information than that. These people reading your application know literally everything about you. It's kind of creepy. The transcript, so that's every class you've ever taken and all the grades, and every class that you're going to enroll in, and that'll be nothing to worry about. Also, there's essays. The essay for the medical school is generally, why do you want to be a doctor? I don't know exactly what the phrasing of the question is, but that's essentially what the question is. If you want to do other degrees, there's more essays, but generally it's only one essay for this application. And then there's another section which I think is overlooked often, and I don't know what it's called, but it's essentially activities. And so you get to fill in about 10 or more. I don't think there's a limit, but you get to fill in activities that you take part in or other things that you do that aren't otherwise in your application that you want the medical school to know about. And so this can be a really good way to work in some of these other things we're going to talk about in the second half of the presentation. And I think, at least when I applied, and I think still, you choose about like 2 or 3 of them as like your most important activities, and then you have to write a little bit longer. So normally these are very short, like 100 words, like a couple sentences. But if you choose it as your most important activity, then you have to write a bit more about it and why it's so important to you. And this includes a title of the activity, how many hours you did it and like what year range that you did it in, and then also a description of all the activities. One important thing here is that they don't actually have to be activities. So a lot of people forget to put things that are really important, and this is in any application. Even if you have something that's good to mention, like if you won an award in high school and there's no awards section in the college application, like make sure it gets in your college application somehow. Anything that you've done that's great and you should be bragging about, definitely brag about it. And then there's a secondary application for most schools. What happens here is that generally they receive the primary application and they do a very rough screen. Generally, in my view, I don't know this for sure, but they look at your GPA and your MCAT and they decide whether or not you would be acceptable. So if you have a really, really bad GPA, then they don't send you a secondary. Some schools automatically send a secondary to everyone, and that's because they charge you around $100 to fill out that secondary application. So this can become very expensive. But these are mostly essays, and they'll ask more about why do you want to go to this school, other questions that are trying to see if you answer them how they want them to be answered. Don't worry about those yet. So those are the actual requirements. Anything that I missed, guys?
I think for AMCAS, like it's an application system that's basically like a beefed up version of the Common App that you might be using now to apply to college, if that's still being used.
I forgot what that was called.
I applied to college. But yeah, it's just a beefed up version of that. And like if the college has like a health careers advising office, which I feel like a lot of colleges do, it's kind of their job to tell you how to use AMCAS. So you'll probably get some sort of information on this later on.
It's not hard. I had no help using it and I managed just fine. So you'll be able to figure it out. You guys are very good at the internet and forums by this point in your lives, I think. But I think it's just good to know the structure a little bit, and that you'll be able to mention a lot of other activities that are that you're interested in or that you did that would enhance your application. And that's what we'll talk about now. So those are the strict requirements. If you have those, you can apply to medical school and you can be accepted. If you only do that, unless you are just the world's best student of all time, it would be very difficult for you to get a good med school. So there's a lot of not strictly required things. You see, I threw Celeste in here. So she's our research paradigm here. So research is one of the things we get asked about a lot, especially as MD PhD students. Research is usually a good idea for your application. It's certainly not required. So if you can't imagine doing research, or you try it and hate it and can never imagine doing it again, don't do research. It certainly makes you a more competitive applicant, but you have to be able to talk about your research and like at least give a few positive sentences about it. If all you can say is that you hate research, then don't do it and do something else that makes you a strong applicant. If you want to do an MD PhD,
research that's not wet lab research,
absolutely,
which I did some of when I was in college. So like, if you're looking for research opportunities, but you hate the idea of like pipetting, I did research in an ED that was more like social. So things like that exist. I'm just saying it so that in the back of your head, you have that as like, that is an opportunity out there somewhere if you need it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think a lot of us have done the kind of traditional like mouse and rats and working at a bench. Certainly I don't do that anymore, and there's a reason for that. That's not what I want to do for the rest of my life. So yeah, there's tons of other types of research that you can do that can help you get into medical school. And the most important part is, one, you should probably enjoy it. If you don't like the research you do, and I have certainly had experiences that I did not enjoy and did for several years anyway, work with someone else whose work you enjoy and who values your time. Certainly it's difficult to break into the research in schools, but once you have experience, you're certainly more valuable. And I think as long as you're willing to put the time and effort in and take a lot of people ignoring your emails, you can definitely get research positions. A lot of them are unpaid, unfortunately. So some schools have programs that will pay people to do research during undergraduate years, but most of the time, this time is volunteer or for course credit. So it's like an unpaid internship kind of thing. It's a little bit of a scam. But it's something that you're doing for your future, and hopefully you enjoy it, and hopefully you're not spending like 1,000,000 hours a week doing this during college. It should be a significant time commitment if you're going to do it, as long as you won't get anything done. But it should not be the only thing that you do during undergraduate. The other thing that's really nice about research, especially if it has any relationship to health, whether it's wet lab or not, it makes something that's very, very easy to default to if you run out of things to talk about during interviews, which can certainly happen. You will have a lot of them if you do interviews. So the question that we often get is, how do I start doing research? So how do you do the research? And starting is definitely a challenge, and it's going to require you to do a lot of the work, unfortunately, which a lot of this stuff is the case as well. So my general approach and the way that I approach it is find a field you're interested in, identify faculty. This is how I approach my current research. So find a field you're interested in, identify faculty at the institutions that you're at, or who you had for a professor. A lot of those professors who are teaching some of these introductory biology courses and others, chemistry courses, whatever subject you like, they are also doing research, and they will be a great source of either as a potential boss, or they can refer you to someone else who has positions in their lab. And this can you can either go up to them after class or go to their office. It's kind of weird these days. Most people would prefer that you email them, and include some information about yourself. Say why you're interested in their lab, and give some information about you. What's my GPA? Am I a freshman, sophomore? What am I studying? Why am I interested in this? Do I want to go to medical school? And the other thing that can be really helpful, and this is the way I got my first lab job in college. So many campuses have offices that will aggregate a list of at least like life sciences. I don't know so much about the non-bench work that Sage is talking about, but there probably are such offices, or they include it in the same list. But they'll aggregate research opportunities. So they'll ask all the professors, like, if you have a job that you want an undergraduate to help with, or a project that you want an undergraduate to help with, please let us know, and then we'll put it on this list. The problem with these is that they get inundated with requests, so you have to do something to set yourself apart often. But apply for a bunch of them. You may not get your first choice, but you may still get a really interesting research project. I know the lady that I worked for posted it for 1 week and had 200 replies. So certainly there's a huge demand for research positions. But if you're persistent, you can certainly get a position. Again, you're giving away free labor. So you should be able to find a way to give it away. The other thing that I've seen a lot of applicants do that I did not do is keep an eye out for summer programs, especially for people who like to travel, assuming we can travel again in the near future. There are a lot of summer programs that will fund research, and often these require applying for because they often give you a stipend for like living in a dorm or an apartment or something like that. But there are a lot of research opportunities in college to go other places and do research. It's not always international, but a lot of the times people will go to other institutions and work for a summer or 8 or 10 weeks in a lab at a different school. And that can be a really cool experience if you can figure out how to do it. So some of these are funded by individual institutions, and some of them are funded by more national type organizations. Okay, another thing that you want on your application, and this can be a lot of different things, it's very general, is a long-term commitment to something. And it's helpful to show several things about you. One is that you have things that you actually commit to. Two is it can be a really good opportunity to showcase any leadership that you have. So that's really nice to have on your application if you're leading some organization or the secretary of some organization, whatever, as long as you're taking some initiative and helping to run something. And 3, initiative again. And then 4, it's really important, especially as you can see in these times, like community engagement is really important. I think all of us are fans of community engagement. We're currently engaging the community. That's sort of a one-way engagement right now. I haven't seen anything on the chat at least. So yeah, but this can be a lot of different things, and this should absolutely not be something that you don't like. There are a lot of things on the med school application. You may have to do a few things that you're like, oh, this is such a waste of time, or I really wish I didn't have to do this. But if you have something that you're committing to long term, it should be absolutely something that you really love doing and you find very rewarding. It can take a lot of different forms. These are some of the most common things that I see. I think kind of sports, band, dance, a cappella groups, like those are the most common things that I see, along with some student groups. So a lot of people help to run student groups or found student groups at different schools, and that can be a really good way to showcase your leadership and commitment. There's a lot of community service organizations. So some of these are like large national organizations. Some of them are local by the campuses where people go to school. Again, research can be an important thing a nice thing to show here. It's sometimes a little bit harder to show leadership here because you're often not in charge in the lab, especially as an undergraduate. So you might want to have something else where you have more of a leadership role. But other things, religious organizations, if you have to work or choose to work during college, having a job, you should certainly mention that during your in your application, because otherwise people will say, well, it seems like they could have been doing more in college. But if you were actually working 30 to 40 hours a week, that's probably explaining why you didn't have time to do a lot of this other stuff. There's only so many hours per day, and everyone knows that. And then I see a lot of people who do tutoring, either of other college students who are struggling or want additional help in certain subjects, or of high school or younger people, just depending on who it is. So yeah, there's a huge number of things that you can do, and do something that you like, of course. And this is another thing that kind of goes along with that. A lot of schools don't explicitly require this, but definitely quantify it, at least in some way, maybe as a little bit, none, or a lot. But they want to see that there's some type of volunteering or altruism. So even if you do have paid work, they want to see that you're giving time to the community, and I think that's goes along with community engagement. So this can be a place where it's a good idea to volunteer with something that's at least somewhat cursorily related to health or community engagement, because that can help you kill two birds with one stone. Of course, you're welcome to volunteer as many opportunities as you want. It's your time, but again, you're going to be managing a full course load and a lot of other requirements. So a lot of this is about time management, and it's kind of an implicit skill that you need to know for medical school and applying. Some of the common stuff I see here, free clinics. So these are often run by universities. A lot of the time they're run by the medical schools at the university, and obviously you won't be able to help in a medical capacity unless you're a medical student. But if you know a second language, you can help with translation. If you don't know a second language, there's a lot of other things you can help with, kind of marketing, forms, a lot of other stuff. Even just like taking care of patients in a non-medical way, it can be very important. A lot of programs have hospital volunteering programs set up, or people that just volunteer through some other way. Some people choose to help out in retirement homes or communities for the elderly. If you have an EMT certification, a lot of campuses have a volunteer EMT service or a paid EMT service. And then there's a lot of other people who will volunteer for things like community health events or training. So maybe they're a CPR instructor. Maybe they go to community health fairs and talk about cardiovascular disease. That seems to be more of a medical, like a med student thing, but certainly there are people who do this during college. And again, it's important to do something that you like. It's much more important to be able to talk about something positively at your interviews and write something that it was a meaningful activity to you in your application. Interest in healthcare, it kind of goes without saying, but you should definitely explicitly say it in your application. And it's important to show an interest in healthcare. That can be through volunteering. It can be through any other number of things. So it's really hard to say exactly how to do this. But certainly your interest in caring for other people should be really apparent in your application. And this kind of ties into this one, which is another thing we get a ton of questions about: shadowing. Most, at least I looked at a couple schools today, but many schools do not strictly require shadowing. That said, this is a very common question that comes up at admissions meetings, where somebody will ask, did that person do any shadowing? So if I can advise anything, and this is definitely feedback I got, I applied to medical school twice because I didn't get in the first time. And most of the time I was told that I didn't have shadowing, and that really hurt my application. So it's not explicitly required, but if it's easy. you actually don't have to do anything while you're shadowing besides show up and be a normal person. 2, it's usually interesting. So you should choose someone that you're interested in that field and follow them around and see what their job is like. If you hate it, maybe reconsider becoming a professional in doing that, or choose a different field in medicine. That's certainly possible. So I would say definitely do it, and don't just do it once. Like, do it a couple times. Most doctors are very happy to have people follow them around, especially if they aren't already being followed around by like 10 residents and a medical students. So especially at some of these community hospitals where people don't have as many people following them around, I think most doctors are really happy to have you follow them around and see what they do, and are very happy to talk about their jobs and what they do and their route, and that can be really helpful as well. And if you shadow them a lot, then you can get a letter of recommendation. So, so the hard part here is you have to find someone to shadow, and this is all on you for the most part. There are some clubs and stuff at some universities that will help you find a shadowing opportunity. But certainly it's possible without that. You just have to identify people, and it can be challenging. I'm definitely not gonna say it's super easy to find someone to shadow, but you have to reach out. You're probably gonna get ignored a lot of times. People will just let you fall through their inbox, but eventually you'll find someone that's really happy to have you along, and will definitely show you some cool stuff. How to find information on specific programs. Look at their admissions website. And then if you're looking at some for more aggregated information, the US News does a similar ranking like they do for colleges, which I think is important to look at. The ranking certainly means something, even if it doesn't mean exactly the ranking. There's also, and I imagine they have this for colleges now too, there's some toxic medical school blogs where I would highly advise you not to like base your whole life worth on this. People are pretty mean on these blogs. I avoided them at all costs. So they can be pretty toxic, pretty unpleasant blogs where people like complain about medical schools or share their stats and where they got it in or something like that. Don't put too much stock in it, but they can be helpful for some information perhaps. I put a bonus slide in for college ranking. I didn't put one for medical school ranking. The medical school ranking boils down to how much money do you have. That's the most important factor, I think. So that's how much research funding does your institution bring in, how much money does it bring in taking care of people as well. For the colleges, we had a question about how the college ranking works and why do some colleges have better rankings than others. Again, money is very important. So the more money a college has, the more money it has to spend on these things to make their ranking better. And you guys are all smart enough to know that since these are all published, certainly college administrators think about this and definitely game the system. So the US News ranking, the most important outcome is outcomes. So that's how do the students do. 35% of the weight for the grade. And the way they score these at the end is the best school gets 100 and every other school gets a lower score. So the best school, the most important is outcome for students. So 22% of that is how much. So essentially they're looking at what percentage of the students that enroll there graduate within 6 years. A little bit about how they do. And then the last one is called social mobility. And what they're looking at is outcomes. So the same type of outcomes for students that are on Pell Grants. So Pell Grants are generally, I think you have to be, your family income is under $50,000 per year. And I think the vast majority of them go to students with family incomes under $20,000 a year. And so what they're looking for here is how do these students do? 20% is on faculty. So like what's the class size? How much are the faculty getting paid is pretty heavily weighted actually. And then checking if the faculty have the highest degree in their field. So are they a PhD if that's the highest degree? Are they a master's if that's the highest degree? A little bit about faculty to student ratio and how many of these faculty are full-time teaching faculty or full-time faculty, not just teaching faculty. 20% of the grade is expert opinion. So this is just a survey they send out to a bunch of deans and provosts and other high-ranking university officials and ask them to rank sister institutions. So they might send one to Northwestern and say like, how do you think UChicago ranks? How do you think UIC ranks? and then they take that into account somehow in a statistical model. 10% is on financial resources, and so this is how much do they spend per student. This excludes sports, dorms, and hospitals. So if you have the world's nicest dorms, it doesn't necessarily mean your ranking will go up. But if you have a more administrative staff to help take care of your students or help them get jobs or help them apply to medical school, that does improve your ranking. Only 10% of the college ranking depends on the students themselves. So that's kind of surprising. And almost all of that is based on standardized testing. So we'll see how this changes as a lot of more colleges are starting to opt out of standardized testing, especially this year when it's very difficult to get the testing done. And then the last 5% is straight up how much money do you have and how much money do you make from alumni. So that's how the US News college ranking works. There are probably some other systems that I haven't accounted for. The US News is certainly the best known college ranking system. And you can see there's a lot of important things, some of them which should be important to you. Do students finish? Are there going to be enough faculty to support you? Does the school have enough money to support you, even though they're probably taking a lot of yours in the balance? And then, are the students great? So conclusions, don't freak out yet. It's a lot of stuff. This is a relatively long presentation. But it is easier both for college and for medical school if you don't wait until like the last minute to try to get all this stuff done. This is a lot of stuff to get done. And again, you won't enjoy everything that you're doing while preparing for medical school. That's inevitable. You'll never like everything. But you should enjoy lots of it. If you're hating every single thing that you're doing preparing for medical school, the bad news is medical school is like preparing for medical school on steroids. So you're going to be doing a lot more of whatever it is that you're hating. Maybe reconsider what you're doing. And that doesn't mean you have to exit healthcare. Maybe a different role in the healthcare system would be better for you, or maybe exiting healthcare entirely is better for you. That just depends on you. And again, like I mentioned earlier, it's a good idea to kill 2 or more birds with 1 stone, because there's a lot of things that are not strictly required but can really help enhance your application. And so, like if you do something that's like long-term volunteering at a hospital, or you have some leadership position of some program during your junior and senior years, you can show an interest in healthcare, long-term commitment, volunteering, letter of recommendation, leadership, all in one thing. And so this is something that you could choose as one of your like important activities that you did and write a little bit more about how it's important to you, especially if you dedicated significant time to it. All right, I think that's all I had. I've been talking for like an hour.
Thanks, Mike.
You guys aren't too sick of me yet.
I just wanted to mention that college ranks exist, but they're definitely not the end all be all. Because as you saw, like they only factor in certain things and not all of them are like, it's really just not like the final say on anything. Like the spectrum of students at Northwestern come from all different types of colleges. Like the college rank, yeah, it's like kind of, it's there, but it's not like so super important. And another thing I wanted to mention, sorry?
You'll notice one important factor that is often omitted from all types of things like this. There's no mention of whether or not the students are happy. So this is omitted from any medical school thing, any college thing. That's the most important factor to you when you're in college. Like, are you having a good time? Are you learning stuff? Like, are you happy being there? And this is, say, 0% of your college ranking. So certainly if you have an option and they're equally attractive and one of them is ranked 18 in the country and one of them is ranked 181st, and they cost the same money and whatever, they're equidistant from your home, obviously you probably lean towards whatever the higher ranking is. But sometimes slightly lower ranking is acceptable if you think you'll be much happier there, or it can save you. And again, sometimes some of the state institutions will be ranked lower than private institutions in the same areas, but they can save you a ridiculous sum of money. So it's certainly something to consider. There's a lot of trade-offs here, and yeah, don't go by the rankings directly, but there's certainly people think about them.
Yeah, so that I just wanted to mention. And secondly, just to like reiterate, your college summers are like an opportunity for you to really do something. I feel like in high school, this was just me, so like in case anyone else did what I did, but in high school I did nothing with my summer. I just like took it off and like had fun. And you should definitely do that in college as well. Like you need, well, most people need like some sort of mental break and like a time to relax and refresh yourself for the next year, because like college is, it's not easy. But if you go to, especially if you go to semester school, like summer is a long time, so take that opportunity to like do something that you can write about and something that you will enjoy at least. So yeah, things you can do like research internships, any sort of internship. You can take a course, you can study for the MCAT. Yeah, so it's kind of like a time for you to capitalize on. And
you also have 3 summers during college. So if you want to take the whole summer off and go on your extravagant vacation to wherever you're going to, and that's in the cards for you, definitely do it. Like you don't have to be grinding towards med school every single minute of your life. And again, as Celeste said, like you should be having fun. You should be having fun your entire college experience. Like if you're not having fun, you're doing something wrong. And you may be overloading yourself. You maybe haven't met the right people at your college. But my philosophy is everyone can enjoy any college. So you may have your heart set on some tiny liberal arts school in the middle of Wisconsin, but you may not get in and you may end up at Madison, and that would be, and you can still have a great time, even if it's not exactly what you expected. Do we have any questions on college or medical school? No. Am I talking to myself the whole time? That's what it feels like.
Or any inputs on what you guys want to see for the next session? I know we haven't heard about Mike's research, so that's...
Oh, my exciting. You guys haven't heard from me at all, have you? Is that overwhelming, how much stuff you need for medical school? It shouldn't be. You have a long time to do it, huh?
Something I would say is I didn't start getting ready for med school until almost my junior year. And it was fine. So, I mean, you need to take the MCAT. You need to decide which cycle you're going to apply for. But a lot of it can be like, you should think about it in advance and plan in advance, but
yeah, just the coursework and the MCAT are hard to last minute.
Yeah, but almost everything else, I mean, even the like long-term thing that you enjoy, hopefully you're doing that. I mean, like mine were karate and a vegetarian cooking club, so I was doing that.
Karate, huh?
Yeah.
And one other thing is that if you get overwhelmed with trying to like pick too many of these things at once, I would say one thing that is often forgotten is that you could, it's important to focus on like the classwork and the MCAT, especially because you can always add other experiences, but if you have to go back and take classes, it takes like more money. So trying to at least put that first is something to keep in mind too.
Yeah, certainly having a 3.2 GPA will hurt you more than not having that extra 3 hours a week volunteering experience, whatever it is.
There's always
more things to do.
Yeah, like you can take a year off and gain experience and hopefully get paid for it and live that year. So
Yeah.
Oh, I talked for a really long time.
Sorry, guys. Well.
Okay, so we're happy to take any suggestions on what you guys want to see for the next session. Or you'll be at the mercy of whatever we come up with. So there's that.
It might be more space medicine.
I thought it was interesting. And I didn't know
Oh,
about the
space medicine's
correlation.
cool.
And
I'm
you didn't
sorry?
even talk about people who study space microbes.
Yeah, that's
Talked about
Yeah.
When you were
Oh,
like other research in space.
it's
No.
a wide field.
I would be like the perfect
Barely
astronaut. Oh,
Sorry?
I would be like the perfect. I'm a twin. I should be the perfect astronaut for that.
Oh, that's true. You got PLK instead of LASIK. I was gonna say,
I'm still eligible.
doomed to never enter
But I'd
space.
be divorced. Too bad. All right. Well, we don't have too much feedback. It seems like. I think Blanca has something to say.
Does anyone want to add anything? Is there anything you would look forward to or want to talk about in the next class?
Do you still want us to keep talking to you on Tuesdays?
Actually,
Chat is open.
can we move this later?
Upstage?
I wonder if people could say if they'd be willing to change the time a little bit. It's
To
just
when?
like like an hour later. It's like it's just really hard for me to make this time
I can
slot.
do it, but
Yeah, same.
Right. I mean, I guess we only need Mike, really. But
well, it just doesn't seem like we're having so much feedback. We can do more anatomy and physiology, sure.
Sure.
Can we do it at 5 o'clock? Maybe we'll send out maybe Blanca can send an email and see if people will respond to that better.
Or a
than
poll, maybe.
Poll.
Like a poll.
What time were we looking for? 5 starting?
Can we do 5
Yeah.
till 6:30?
Or, yeah. See.
Yeah, I'll send out an email to see if everyone's okay with that.
yeah, I mean, we don't have to move everything for me. I just was wondering if students had thoughts on it.
I think right now there's about 2 weeks left of school. Let's see.
We could always start and Sage could join us a bit later too.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I can always join late, but
All right. Well, let's keep it the same time for next week and then we'll see
Mhm.
if we can adjust maybe later. Don't want to interrupt everyone's family dinner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, if that's all for this week, thank you guys for coming. Again, email me with any questions you have, anything you would want to study further within
If
this
there's any
class.
specific anatomy or physiology you want to learn, let us know.
And also,
I guess Earth
Go ahead.
physiology.
if you'd be okay with a time change later in the future, just so we could start planning that.
has it been decided how
Decided
many
how many weeks we have left? I think we were prepared to talk as long as you guys are interested in hearing from us.
That's pretty much how it would work, yeah.
If you're not interested in hearing from us, like, please just tell us and we'll stop talking. That's easy.
Yeah.
I'll just be talking at home to myself.
Or if you don't want to
There's-
tell us, you can tell Blanca and she'll be nice.
Yeah, there's really no hard feelings. I feel like through Zoom, it's definitely kind of difficult. So we get it.
Or if you want it to be shorter, if you want to do half an hour or an hour, that's totally fine. Just let us know what you think.
Yes,
I'll
we
send out a
take
few
any
emails.
feedback.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you guys. See you next week.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
And people are still here because they're leaving the meeting. And there's no response.
They're listening.
It's hard to tell if anyone's listening. Maybe I'm just
Yeah.
talking to you guys.
Because when you present,
listening.
it's just a void.
Yeah.
You're just
It's
kind
hard
of-
to like stay excited. It's hard to be excited because it's like
yeah.
no one
It-
is listening.
It's like,
Still no
you
one
don't-
is listening.
yeah, like, because
I
when
see
you're giving a
Sage
presentation in
something
real
with her
time,
pencil or pen or something like that.
yeah, like you look
Or
at the
something.
audience and you can like see what they're doing, but here there's like no cues at all. It's just
For
black.
some reason, Mine just wanted me to show me Sage the whole time until she turned her video off and I got to look out Celeste's window.
Yeah, my window's not very interesting. It's just a parking lot. But before I forget, Sandra, I thought your idea of the stethoscopes was brilliant.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
So I found some, oh God, where did I save these? And we can also get like reflex hammers as well, because I think that's always
Ooh.
fun to like hit joints and stuff.
Reflex hammers are fun.
If that's like-
Did we talk about blood pressure cuffs too?
Yeah, I don't
Or
know
is
if
that
I
invasive?
found, well,
I don't know.
You could find BLS level BP cuffs probably.
Well, they're easy to find. Yeah, they're cheap too.
okay. I saved these somewhere, but now I forget where. Shoot.
What
Okay.
were you trying to find about them?
Like the links that I'd saved and send them to you guys. But basically the stethoscopes, they're like $30 each. So if we get 10, that's $300. The reflex hammers are like $15 or $20.
They're
So-
more than oh, they're half. Okay, got it.
Yeah, they're
Not cheap.
not like,
You just do what I do in clinic. Use my stethoscope as a reflex hammer. It works better in kids though than adults.
Yeah.
oh really?
Use your $150 stethoscope as a reflex hammer.
I always have to carry a reflex hammer.
You can just push on it with your finger and hit hard.
Wow. I
People don't
literally-
usually like me physically hitting their children though.
Rural medicine, man. You can't carry everything.
Okay, so anyway,
Oh, here we go. Okay, I found them. Thank God. I'm going to send them in the chat. So this is the reflex hammer. I'm not like married to any of these specifically, but this is
are
like
they from Amazon, Celeste?
one's from
Nice.
Amazon.
I don't
And
think
Nicer
then-
that
reflex
came
hammer
through.
than I had.
Is it? Ooh.
Yeah.
And then the stethoscopes are from,
This would be ordered on our end, right?
yeah. It's
Okay.
not like through the Boys and Girls Club. We're just trying to like use our extra budget, of which we have like around 2,000.
I feel like it's probably going to be easier if we order them all from the same place for whoever's ordering.
That's true.
But we can always, there's a million different cheap stethoscopes online.
Yeah, I think we can just search Amazon for the
Yeah, I
brand.
did. It's really easy to find them. There's like a whole bunch.
Okay.
We're not divesting from Amazon.
You're divesting from Amazon?
I said we're not.
No, we're definitely not.
Yeah, it's tough. I'm like sadly reliant. And, but
But blood pressure cuff would be good.
okay,
do we
can
do we need additional supplies for the blood sugar monitor, the glucose monitors?
Oh yeah, yeah. We
I
can
guess
get
we're probably
something.
not doing diabetes in the next 3 years.
Probably not.
Well, like you could do it in like 2 or 3 years.
But yeah, we can add those. I think we have the budget for it. 'Cause I
We
can.
might as well buy things if we have it.
Oh, what about those like? Do we still have a lot of those like coloring books left? Like the anatomy coloring book thingies?
Those are good.
I think we
We can
We're
look at
gonna make
that.
them color.
No, we usually give them out as
Like a
gifts or
kidney?
prizes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah.
fun.
Oh,
We
maybe
get whoever's the most interactive in our class gets a coloring book.
maybe we can do like trivia next time and force people to
Oh,
respond.
that's a good idea.
No, then it's just gonna be really awkwardly us staring at each other waiting for someone to answer.
Yeah, that's true.
And I get it; it's really hard to respond quickly in a chat. I was trying to do it like a talk a couple days ago, and it was impossible.
Yeah. Okay.
But I mean,
One
They
thing
can-
that could be helpful, we could bring back the survey. So planning ahead and taking specific questions from the actual PowerPoint, putting them in like survey form for people to answer. See if they're listening.
That's
things
fair.
like that.
Yeah.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea.
Do we have the power to set up surveys in advance, Blanca?
Yeah. It's just on the website. Just
Oh.
So do we
up
just have
there.
to send it to you, or can we do that?
Yeah, you could just send it to me and then I'll just like put it in there.
Okay, that's a good idea. We're just reducing the effort required to interact with us.
Sometimes it's needed.
Yeah.
I've been in like Zoom conferences in the past like 3 weeks where I don't think anyone was listening, and those are just adults. So
I'm the one not listening in a lot of those. I've gotten pretty good at Switch. I have way too
Guys,
way
I've
too
been
many
so
Zoom meetings.
productive. I love Zoom conferences because I
I
can do
work the
my
whole time.
whole
I don't do
job
anything. Yeah, it's great.
and listen to a Zoom conference at the same time. It's magical.
Yeah, you can really multitask.
Yeah.
Well, it's not multitasking because you're definitely not listening to the Zoom.
I just don't need my brain to do my job, Mike.
I like phase in and out. So I just do both
It's wet
things
lab.
poorly.
I'm moving things around with very fancy tools.
Right.
Okay. Do we have a plan for next time?
No.
Does that mean I should talk about my research? Because then we're exhausting all of us.
Yes,
You
please.
could
Actually, that would be a good feed into anatomy because, like, you talk about.
But I do
Looking
the
at the
heart.
heart.
We already talked about. I
Yeah.
already did the heart like 3 weeks
do-
ago.
So
It's true.
I don't know if this is something that we want to necessarily cover, but today there was a really good health disparities talk. And it was
Zoom.
centered around COVID, but it was talking about like what really what are the like actual underlying social determinants of health disparity. Maybe something like that. I don't know if that's like something that we want to cover.
I think it's a hard lecture to give well,
Yeah, I agree.
but we
I'm
can
always
certainly
afraid of
try.
saying something wrong.
We can also do, the other thing I was going to say is we can start having guest lecturers also if you want, even if it's just like other MSTP students talking
Yeah,
about
absolutely.
like
Yeah, we can
different
definitely do that.
research or different things that they have done.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Those were my 2 thoughts.
Yeah, we can definitely try that for next time. Okay, so we can do half Mike's research and then half either a guest speaker or.
I think we should just cover like some very basic organ system physiology like every week. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Like we already did heart and lungs, but we could just like do kidneys or do liver or do bones or something like that. Whatever.
Do that.
What, you don't like that?
Hmm.
Because it can just be like a really high level, like look at the page in first aid, make that into like 5 slides, and that's like our physiology for the day. Because Ethan is the only person responding to us, and he's interested in anatomy and physiology. So
He's
that's like
going into ortho. You can't
Really?
tell?
I haven't seen his hair yet. Got to see the hair first.
know if he's doing plastics or ortho.
Yeah, plastics
That's
versus
true.
ortho. It's all about hair.
All right, sounds good.
Well, we'll figure something
Yeah.
out.
I'm gonna just go ahead and find the blood pressure cuffs and stethoscopes on Amazon and then just talk to Lindsay about it.
We want to order the coloring books too.
Yeah, we can throw them in there. I think it's all gonna come under $2,000 anyway, and I'd rather use it than lose it to other things the school is doing. So
Okay.
yeah, cool. Thanks, guys.
thank you guys.
You guys.
Bye.